Hi everyone, welcome again for the new webinar. So today we have international speaker uh, Nishant Srivastava. He's basically Indian, but now he's from Berlin, and today he's going to talk about my love and hate relationship with Android Studio. Before we invite the speaker, I just want to let you know that guys, be safe. Please be at home because the situations are getting worst. Okay. So let's invite our today's speaker, Nishant Srivastav. Hi, Nishant. How are you?
Hello, everyone. I'm very good and in the lockdown, so enjoying my time at home. Hopefully, everyone else is also being safe at home. You all need to take care of yourself. And it is
So,
great to be here at GDG Ahmedabad. It's awesome.
welcome, welcome, Nishant. So most of the time, I used to call you as a Srivastav Sahab. So just pardon me if I, just call you by that name.
Works for
Uh,
me.
so, so, uh, so most of the time, we found that many Android developers have a lot of problem with the Android Studio. And based on your topic, that my love and hate relationship with Android Studio. So before we start the session, can you just give some idea how you come to this title and how your story has started?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, what usually happens for every other developer who is into the Android domain, that they are like developing some sort of application, working with some code on Android, but all of that they're doing is doing specifically on Android Studio. Now, what comes out to be is that every single day, for me at least, I see something happening with Android Studio. So some days I love Android Studio because it does things as I want it to do, and some days it does not do anything, and it just stops, doesn't let me do my work, and that's like my hate relationship with Android Studio. And this is how I actually thought of this talk in general, basically calling my love hate relationship. What I love about Android Studio, what the Android Studio development team is doing behind the scenes for this thing, and also like there's a lot of different problems that I see, which I will be talking about in the presentation, where I will go through the process of how I encountered those problems and what I see is a drawback in terms of how Android Studio is being developed, although it is the daily driver for us.
Nice. Okay. So are we ready?
Yeah, I guess. Yes.
Cool.
Okay, great. So before I actually start talking about this particular talk in general, my love-hate relationship with Android Studio, what I do want you all guys and girls to understand is that this talk in general is not going to be about how bad Android Studio is, but it's mostly my personal experience, what I think when I develop something, I see those different nuances, I see those problems, and then those nice things about Android Studio, and that's what I'll be talking about. Android Studio is in general is one of the best tools out there. It's like one of those Android related IDEs that you can use, and you'll be usually be working with it all the time, right? So it's our daily driver. We cannot just get rid of it. So this is not like a rant against Android Studio, but it's more about just simple experiences and how actually you can use Android Studio or not use Android Studio, is what I will be talking about. So before I jump into all these different things, let's look at the story behind this thing, right? So where it all started. So the first thing that actually happened, this happened quite some time back, but basically I was trying to build an Android Studio project, right? It was a typical project. I had multi-modules. I had all the different options that you could have in a standard application. For example, in this particular case, I had native code. Basically, I was running NDK stuff, C++ code, and then there was common dependencies that you will always see. There's retrofit, there's Dagger, there's reactive Java or Android support libraries, or as we call them as Android X nowadays. And all of this, when I started to like basically run them on my laptop at that time, which basically had a configuration of say Core i5, 1.4 gigahertz, basically a MacBook Air early 2014 edition. Most people don't have that, but considering at that time I had that, and I had 4 gigs of RAM, 128 GB of SSD, and then standard Intel HD graphics. Now, the thing that happened with running that project that I had with all those different dependencies and standard configuration was that when I ran it for the first time, my build time was around 37, 38 minutes, which is how I basically would, every time I hit run, the application would go into 38 minutes for building and compiling all this code. So that's definitely not the best thing to do, right? Like you just cannot just start a build and then go for a coffee break and then come back and then start again and then go for another coffee break. Definitely good for enjoying your time off work, but not good for development. So this was not just happening just one time. I would say every single time if I will run the build, basically I will see the same 38-minute, 37-minute cycle go on. So that was not like the only thing that was happening. So build time's really bad. We know this. But what was also happening is that my system was heating up really a lot. I was hitting temperatures almost like 90 degrees centigrade, so that like you could not just keep your hands on your laptop anymore. So there's a meme for that, basically saying that instead of using the room heaters in winter, use your laptop running Android Studio. So it's like a really bad problem to have, because you want to do some development, you want to build some code, but it's taking a very long time for you. At the same time, your system is also kind of like generating a lot of heat, right? So in this case, the usual thing that any Android developer would basically go ahead and do was, I just went in and I started doing some standard Gradle tweaks, which I will talk about in a couple of these upcoming slides. So when I did those tweaks, basically my build time was down to 28 minutes. That's great. I just got down by 10 minutes, right? I wouldn't say it's as great either, because 28 minutes is still a high, like a very large time for a build to go through. So I basically started trying all the possibilities that were possible at that time, right? So I was trying to fix things, trying to optimize my code base, thinking there's some problem in there. Well, nothing worked out for me. Still 28-minute build cycles, and I was really like in a state where I had to deliver code, I had to deliver features, but nothing would work out because I had to wait for 28 minutes. So I did this thing, as in I switched to a terminal and basically started building my code from terminal. And instead of using Android Studio, I started using VS Code Editor. You all know VS Code Editor is a standard code editor, allows for you to do some code completion as well as syntax highlighting. That's the only thing I was looking for at that time. Turns out this, as I did this, basically, this is a tweet at that time when I actually switched to using terminal and VS Code. Turns out when I did this, I switched to this version. My final result was that my build time was down to less than 3 minutes. So it's like 89% reduction. And I'm not making this up. I basically wrote about this. There's like a blog post for this that you can see. And as you can see, my build time with Android Studio was 28 minutes, 7 seconds, and 96 milliseconds. But when I went ahead and did Gradle Leo build, my build time was down to 2 minutes and 52 seconds. So this kind of thing happened. But you will assume that, okay, with recent advancements and everything, Android Studio in general has been updating, and there's been Project Marble and other things in play too, right? So for this, I want to mention that I quite recently, I had got a new MacBook Pro. It was 16-inch and 2019 model. I think the text is wrong. I should have fixed it. But anyways, when I started running Android Studio 4.0 beta 01, we are at 03 right now. So at 4.0 beta 01, my system was running, it has almost 32 gigs of RAM, and it was running at a really high memory usage, and started saying that I have low memory. So I'm already giving it 4 gigs of RAM as a dedicated memory. So it didn't work out for me when I started running that. Turns out, if I go back to doing this with terminal, my build time is down to 1 minute and 6 seconds. But if I do it with my Android Studio 4.0 beta 01, the build time is still 13 minutes. Some stuff that Android Studio is doing is definitely not equivalent to what it is on terminal. So I kind of mostly developed with Android Studio being on the side and using only terminal and VS Code. The good thing about all of this is that I'm just happy that I was not in the spot like this guy. So this guy basically is building an Android project. I don't know how complex that is, but his Gradle build took like 9 hours and 29 minutes and 44 seconds. That's a lot. So I'm just happy that I'm not this guy. Okay, so at this point, we have a story, right? We understand what's happening. We understand we have a problem. So what this actually led to is that I had a bad experience with Android Studio at that particular point in time. So I'm going to be listing out some of those bad experiences, and then we'll look at how we can navigate those problems, how we can get past those problems, and then probably like have a much better developer cycle, like being able to write Android code and be able to develop and push it out quickly, as quickly as we can. So I'll start by quoting some tweets and also the state of these things. So for example, the state of speed for Android Studio right now is pretty slow. You can see that people are tweeting about saying that I think I spend more of my life waiting for Android Studio to update indices than I do waiting for a Gradle build. What this guy basically said, yes?
So Nishant, as in India, the Mahabharata and Ramayana is actually re-telecasting on the Doordarshan. So the Deep Dave from the viewer, he's commenting that Kalyug ka Maryada Purushottam, the person who actually spent 9 hours.
I think so. That is true. Like he's literally representing this person because he's spending 9 hours, right, for a build, and I'm pretty sure your work day is 8 hours. So this guy did not do anything this whole time.
Cool.
Yeah. So what Ash was kind of saying in the last slide was basically he's saying that he spends a lot of time updating indices, and this is what it looks like. You can see that this guy is waiting for this indexing to finish, and he's just spending a lot of time. That's how he's joking about it. But this is actually a problem, and sometimes people also joke about by saying that. As if you would have seen like this movie, basically they talk about 1 hour here, 7 years on Earth. Great, I'll wait here for my Gradle build to finish. It's like one of the jokes floating around on the internet. But these kind of problems are there. We know those exist. Something similar is that the state of reliability, as we'll talk about it. And that is about critical issues. So for example, Christina here basically is writing her XML layout code inside the terminal in Vim editor. And the reason why she's doing that is I'll show you why she's resorted to doing this in terminal is because there was a bug in May 30. A bug basically talked about that layout XML editor hangs and freezes during auto-completion. So basically you're trying to write some layout code and then you start writing something and then your layout editor freezes. So nothing happens. But it was reported on May 30. It was marked fixed, which was pretty nice. But turns out it took them 3 months to fix this critical issue. Now, what I want to highlight here is that as Android developers, we are expected to respond to our apps not conforming to a certain security problem, right? Or if our app is not following a certain pattern, Google decides to throw our app away from Google Play Store, right? But that's not the same thing that happens when it comes to Android Studio, which is directly delivered to the developers. Something as critical as not being able to edit your layout files is something that they are like existed for 3 months, and then it was fixed, and then only people could actually start using it properly. So those kind of things are also happening all the time, and this is like that's why the state of reliability for critical issues is really bad. Let's also talk about how finicky it is. So this is me tweeting about one of these days where I say another day, another Android Studio fight. Basically, you can see in Android Studio, there's a lot of red markers. Basically, Android Studio cannot recognize the symbols. It is not able to index them properly. And this just happened quite randomly. I left my desk to go have lunch, came back, hit rebuild, and I had red lines all over the Android Studio. So it's really finicky. it's come to a point where people started suggesting these kind of solutions where they say, is Android Studio randomly highlighting perfectly fine syntax? The solution, they say, is that you should go ahead and delete your .idea/libraries folder and resync your project. Now, understand this, that if you're going to be deleting your idea libraries folder, you're basically deleting all the dependencies. That should still not break Android SDK code. So in general, I'm talking about your on create function or on destroy function. They are also marked as red, but they come from Android SDK and not as third-party libraries. So this solution is, although it kind of works sometimes and does not work sometimes, it's very finicky. You don't know what's the right solution. And someone would say, no, you can go ahead and do invalidate caches and restart. The problem here is that it does not work all the time. Here's this guy is talking about like, how should I fix this problem? They say the invalidating cache through the option in Android Studio files and restarting did not work for me. But the solution of going ahead and deleting your Gradle caches does. So that's again someone running a terminal command, by the way, to delete the Gradle caches. At this point, I want to mention this, that because it is so finicky, it is so bad, and people don't know what is the right solution, someone had to go back and build a nuke script. Now, what nuke script basically does is it deletes everything that is related to Android Studio, except your projects, but everything related to Android Studio, and it cleans everything out. So you delete your caches, that I quite recently did this again. I had the same situation where I had to go and execute this, and this happened quite recently. Once we had the 3.6.2 beta, the stable release for Android Studio. So I kind of use this quite often, I would say, because Android Studio doesn't work for me as much. And then there are situations where I also mention the approach I usually have. I say that, okay, I'm going to run the nuke script. I hope it fixes the problem. If it doesn't, then I don't know what will. The good part is that I know that I can work with VS Code and I can work with a terminal. So it might work for me, but not sure for other people. The state of polish also, let's talk about that, is also really finicky. Now, here in this case, you can see that when someone is trying to change their build type or variant here, the whole file structure is re-indexed or is searched through so that they can display it into the project bar. And you can go to the Reddit link that I posted here. This is where this screenshot comes from. And the reason that they have to do is because it is trying to index something that it should not. It should have taken a diff and then only updated the things that it thinks has updated. The state of choice also is pretty much forced. It deviates from the base. Now, Android Studio is built on IntelliJ IDEA, as you would know, and they are all working with any Gradle plugin you give them of Android Studio, Android Gradle plugin 3.2, 3.3, 3.4. Any of those, if you open the project in IntelliJ IDEA, you can just use them. It's pretty easy to do that. But if you wanted to do the same thing on Android Studio, that's not possible. The reason being that Android Studio cannot open this project because it is tied to a certain Android Gradle plugin. So if you are using 3.6, you have to use 3.6 as the plugin, right? And if you can use probably the lower version, but if you want to use 4.0 now, you can't, because Android Studio is tied to those Android plugins. So it's a very forced version of making you work with things. And that's a bad experience for me. I'm not sure if other people resonate with the same thing, but I would like to have more freedom the same way as IntelliJ IDEA allows me to do it. Let's also go to the part where we look at the state of memory consumption. That is not suitable. So on my MacBook Air at that time, when I run Android Studio, the memory consumption was around 1.04 gigs, right? And remember, my RAM is 4 gigs. So in that sense, Android Studio was basically consuming almost 1/4 of my RAM. There are people, those who have been running Android Studio, and they get like 8 gigs of the RAM being used. So this person has 32 gigs of RAM, Android Studio kind of ramped up and now started consuming 8 gigs of RAM. And this same particular problem also gets added to the Android virtual device, by the way. So Android virtual device, this is quite recent from 3.6 stable. I created a virtual device, I closed my system, switched it on, the size on disk increased exponentially. And as you can see, it's like, I don't even know how to read, 2097,000 something, 158 gigs of memory this is using. So it's basically not usable and my system is completely full. I don't know what extra cycle that it ran through, that it basically generated a lot of files for it to fill up my hard disk. So I basically went ahead and I deleted this and I had all my free memory. So the way that they are actually handling memory is not quite polished, as I would say. So much so that people start talking about and making jokes about it. Again, they say, what on earth requires 1.5 terabytes of RAM to run Android Studio? So that's like a joke, again, flowing on the interwebs. And then because we're talking about memory, we should look at the state of CPU consumption, because that is also unacceptable. In my case, it was hitting 250.6%, definitely not 100%, because I don't know how the numbering works, but in this case, they were going beyond 100% for me. And that's really bad because I cannot do anything else in this system. So those problems are there for other people too, by the way. I'm not just putting these problems that I have, but I'm mostly sharing screenshots from my own experiences. But definitely, if you Google through things, you will definitely find something related to this from other people too. Now, because we are talking also CPU, let's also look at one of these instances I saw on the interwebs. So there's this person who basically was using Android Studio. They installed it pretty much on a new laptop. And the CPU usage at this point started to hit 1000% within 10 minutes for them. As you can see in the screenshot, it's also 977.5% when they took the screenshot. Now, the problem here is that I think by this time they probably saw my talk or something, because what happened is that the system restarted 3 times and it deleted VS Code and also the terminal configs, which is weird coincidence, but probably this is not because of my talk. But in general, they kind of did it. So that's super weird. Like, they should not be doing it. Even first of all, Android Studio should not be using 1000% of CPU. And the second thing is that it should definitely not go ahead and delete your VS Code or any other application, or delete your terminal configurations, right? So that's something that's very unacceptable. It's something that you would never want to happen. And it is also very unreliable, I would say, because at this point, we don't know what is stable version, because stable version in general is not functional as much. As I already showed you, Android Studio beta is something that the advocates are also like trying to promote more often. They talk about that we should switch to Android beta first, because that has the fix which Android Studio stable does not have it. So it's like you have these states, different update states. You have stable, you have beta, you have canary, but people are promoting beta being more stable than unstable. So that's like a very unreliable version to have in terms of states of updates. And also the state of result from Android Studio. I want to talk about this because it happens a lot. The false positive are pretty much more now. As you can see, this picture is when you have, it says build completed successfully, but it has 76 errors and 1 warning. So you're not sure, like, is my build correct or is it something's broken here? There are people who have also posted about it by saying the build failed, but it failed successfully with a tick mark. That's your false positive. Again, it's trying to report by saying that something succeeded, but your build failed too. Pretty unreliable here also. And with the update that we have been seeing since 3.3 onwards, is that there are tools that are very limited now to Android Studio. Like, for example, at certain point in time when we were using Eclipse, we had Android Studio plugin, or not, it wasn't called Studio, but basically Android plugin that allowed you to do Android development. And then came along Android Studio, which was almost at par with IntelliJ IDEA, the base on which it is built with, but it soon started to deviate and started adding new tools that you cannot get anywhere else. Like, for example, the energy profiler is something I cannot use directly from VS Code, or I could use it from IntelliJ IDEA. I can't do that. The same goes for your constraint layout editor. You don't have access to it outside Android Studio. The resource manager that was recently added, you don't have access to that either because it lives inside Android Studio. Now, why am I saying this? Because earlier in the past, we do had access to trigger SDK manager, AVD manager. We had access to the heap dump, a hierarchy viewer, stack trace, and all these different tools that live in the SDK and that can be utilized by other IDEs too. And you could basically trigger them, but you can't do them anymore because Android Studio limited them to itself. The state of tools, when I also talk about, is very limited because the apply changes has a weird issue that I want to talk about. So apply changes, I think a lot of people started using it because they rebranded instant versions to apply changes. Now, if you read through it, the fine line around how they explain apply changes works is the highlighted part is the important one. They say we rely on runtime instrumentation that is supported in Android 8.0 and newer devices and emulators to redefine classes on the fly. This is how apply changes work. However, they contradict themselves later in the release notes. So in the release note, they talk about that apply changes would basically cause a bit of an error here, is that if you're using a device that runs Android 8.0 or 8.1, you might encounter verification error. The message is caused by an issue with Android runtime that is fixed in Android 9.0 and higher. So apply changes basically worked from 8.0, but is fully functional from 9.0 and higher. So basically, whatever you thought that you would be using as apply changes in 8.0 is basically not possible there unless you are using Android 9.0. So when they are trying to define these different tools that they are building, they are not being very particular about saying where does it work. You might actually start using it at 8.0 or 8.1 and you will get this error. And then you will question your own sanity because the apply changes tool says that it works from 8.0 and onwards. So the specification is not very much clear, and that's the problem here. And this one particular thing, this is a personal view because I kind of deploy my application to many different emulators and physical devices at the same times. So earlier, I could actually just go ahead and use same selection for future launches. So that means that if I hit run, I could run it many times. And that basically would allow me to deploy it to all the emulators and all the physical devices that I have. But what they did was they basically removed that checkbox, and now I have to manually go and select each device every time I have to hit run to deploy to different emulators and I would say physical devices. Now that is not a big problem, but it's a pet peeve for me because I use this as much, and I believe that I should be able to hit run once and be able to deploy to all the connected devices as and when I want without having to go through the process of clicking checkbox each time. So obviously I cannot do it anymore with the new version, but I did build a workaround to get it work for myself, which I will explain in a few minutes. So to summarize, Android Studio in general is kind of slow. It is finicky. It forces it defaults and deviates from its base, right? And then all the new tools that they have is basically pretty limiting in my case because I cannot use them when Android Studio is not working for me. And there's also all these issues related to, say, the versioning quality, the memory, the CPU, all of this information. All of this thing is something that is a little bit buggy here and there, even though they have made a few changes with this. Okay, so I see someone put a question here. After updating Studio to 3.6.1, when I create new layout files, sometimes Studio cannot find that file. I have to restart Studio for that. So the problem with that, Sagar Mayad, I think if I'm saying your name correctly, is that Android Studio is not able to index your layout file. And that is an inherent problem with Android Studio in general. which if you do want to fix it, you have to use something that is not Android Studio. So in this case, the solution would be probably to switch over to IntelliJ IDEA and use that as much. Or the better solution is that you forcefully make Android Studio no data file has changed. So in your project structure column on the side, you have an option of hitting sync with file system, and it will forcefully sync the file system. And that's how like I probably solve it. But the problem exists inside Android Studio and not in, say, the way that you're doing things. You're doing it right. It's that Android Studio is not triggering and indexing when it should do it. Okay, so back to the slides. So because I'm talking about all these problems in Android Studio, I'm going to be talking about the workarounds, all these problems that I had, right? And how I can fix that. The standard thing that we just came up with that is that Android Studio is slow. Before I start jumping into the solution for this, we need to understand why does that happen. So the common problems that we all know is that Gradle configuration is something that could be wrong, right? So if you actually compare against 1000 Java modules by incrementally compiling them, you can see as the new Gradle version gets releases, you get better performance, right? You take less time to compile those 1000 modules. Now, to fix that, even before we jump into the actual configuration, understand that there is a caveat here, as in, if you switch to the latest Canary version of Android Studio, you are also tied to a certain support of latest Gradle. For example, the stable version right now supports 6.0.1 Gradle version, although the latest deployed Gradle is 6.3 now. Right, so in that case, you cannot actually reuse this problem, this fix that is released in 6.3 because it is again tied to Android Studio. So that's a problem. But we'll jump into this problem also, how we can fix this. As we all know, the standard way of fixing the Gradle configuration is that you enable the build cache. The way you do it is that you go into your Gradle properties, and then you define android.enable build cache, and then you set it to true. And that also means that you are going to be reusing all the build files unless they have been changed. The other things that you can set is setting up a Gradle daemon. That basically is a running process, and it kind of, as soon as you trigger another build, it will reuse this running process. Now, what happens is that the reason that you need this daemon is that if you did not use the daemon, there would be a new process spawned every single time you run the build. And that kind of is a problem because every time a new process started, it takes some time to warm itself, and then it will take some time to load properly before it can go on and do your build. So that extra time that you're spending here, you don't want to do this. So you want to run a background process, which is called a daemon in Linux. And that is why you're saying use the Gradle daemon from here onwards every time I hit build for my project. Another thing that you can set in the Gradle configuration is that you can define the JVM memory here, and you're trying to say that you're going to be allotting 2048 megabytes or 2 gigabytes, and then you're suggesting what's the maximum permissible size for each allocated section. So in this case, 512 megabytes. If you set this, you're basically saying that you have enough memory to work with. It doesn't do a lot of, I would say, it doesn't make things super fast, but it is pretty good to have around if you do want to optimize something. So that said, how about if you could parallelize or make our builds happen at the same time in different modules? The way it works is that you can ask Gradle to start compiling multiple different modules at the same time. So that's why you want to say that I want to enable the parallel build setup too. And the way you do that is that you define all.gradle.parallel equal to true. And last but not the least, basically the configuration section here is, and this one is important, is that whenever you actually compile your project, know that you are compiling the whole project. So when you say, for example, on terminal also, you say Gradle you assemble, you're kind of assembling all the modules in each variant. So it could be debug, release, mock build that you have, against all the different other versions that you have for your build, right? So if you want to narrow it down, you would say Gradle you assemble debug, and that's gonna still go ahead and build different versions for the debug variant of your application. Still going to take a lot of time to reduce this whole thing down and narrow it down to exactly the module you want the build to go through. Is that you will say Gradle new, define the module name, and then define the task on it. That just makes sure that if you have 100 modules, you are only running the build against one module, the one that you specify. And that's something that is just used if you want to have a better build cycle and you want to move fast for it. Okay. We talked about this problem also. The problem with the reducing the indexing is that because your system is running is trying to add all these different files that are changing so quickly, it keeps on triggering the indexing process. Now you don't want that to happen, right? You want to skip this process. And the way you do that is that you will have to make sure that less files change on your system. How would you do that? Well, basically avoid annotation processors as much as you can. Use incremental annotation processor. And that just makes sure that less files are changed, right? So indexing will take less time. Use implementation versus API. This is a Gradle topic, but I'm pretty sure you understand what implementation versus API is. A general version would be that you don't build every other module unless something else depends on it. And then also, if you have something in your build.gradle file where you mention a version code that depends on your commit number, that file is changing a lot. So build.gradle file in general is changing every time you hit the build command. So you don't want that to happen either. And if you have less file changing, you have less files to index, and that just increases your speed too.
So we have some questions from the viewers. So we have one question from the Molly Hirani. So he's posting that the biggest problem I'm facing every time is Android Studio not detecting data binding variables and view IDs, but the project still builds. So what can be the problem? And because
go on.
Yeah, so this kind of problem has also been happened with the Sagar Mayad. He also tweeted posted that it happens often with me also. So is there any the common solution that you might have come across?
Yeah. So the way data binding actually works is that you when you actually trigger a build, it generates it goes through your layout files, and then it generates a Java or a Kotlin version of the same thing. And that's how you're able to reference those IDs directly. Now, what you did mention right now is an ongoing issue on the Android bug tracker. And this has been probably ported as a fix in the Canary version. So 4.1 is the Android Studio version where you will get this problem. What has already been asked in the Android bug tracker is that fix be ported back to 4.0 beta, and we also ported back to 3.6.2 stable, just because the Canary is not going stable right now. So that's an ongoing discussion. Maybe I will share the link of this bug later on. But basically, this problem is not solved yet. Only in the Canary version that you can see that it is fully functional. If you do wanted to solve it on your case, the better solution is that something is restricting your Android Studio from being able to generate the build files while you are working. So it works when you hit the build. The reason that is that when the build is complete, you have the file built out of the layout, and that's why you can use it. But if you are trying to use it while you are developing things, the build system of Android Studio is not able to generate the file for you. That's why you don't have direct access. But when you hit the full build, the file is generated and everything works fine for you.
We have one more question or one more doubt from the Pranav. So he writes that sometimes my class files change whole content in Android Studio, but when I check same file in Explorer in the system, it's seeing fine. So I guess it's like Android Studio shows something else and the file Explorer shows something else.
That is a weird one, I would say. I have never seen this, but my assumption here is that maybe you are not saving your file or something like that. Because, okay, so what I have seen is that sometimes I would open the same class file in Android Studio and I would open the same class file in Visual Studio Code. And if I forget to change, if I make changes in VS Code and I forget to save the file and I go back to Android Studio, I definitely don't see the same change followed to the Android Studio, right? So this is my vision, that you kind of didn't save it properly. Even if you did, we'll have to probably see why that is happening for you specifically, or is there a bug already filed in the Android bug tracker? Like if this is an ongoing problem, you will see it more often.
Yeah. So one of the viewer name Harsh Dalwadi has posted that sometimes when I copy paste the existing Kotlin file .kt
Mhm.
from Android Studio directory using F5, which contains Android View model as parent class, the new file just not appear at all. And consecutively, he also posted that I need to copy that file to desktop, then copy paste from that, and then it works. So it's like direct Android Studio, it doesn't work. So
Okay.
have you face this challenge, or you know about the kind of bug is reported?
Yeah, I have not seen this myself, but again, if you see something that is very different, the first way of figuring out is this a known bug or not, right? So do that go to bugs.android.com and search for your problem. If there is a problem and someone has already filed for it, good, then look for the solution and how it has gone through the process. If no solution is being delivered, then you don't have a choice. Maybe just follow through until a solution is released. Or the better version is that if no one has yet filed for that issue, you file for that bug yourself, and then you let the Android Studio team know that, okay, something is wrong, maybe suggest me what the right solution is. Because inherently what is happening is that Android Studio is not able to track what is changing on the file system, and that is a problem in the IDE that you cannot go in and fix it. You have to probably decompile, or maybe you have to build from source. You do have a bit of the code in Android open source project that you can also pull in and also try to build it on your own. But yeah, the better solution is to go into the bug.android.com and post the bug if it does not exist. If it does, then star the bug and look through the solution what they are talking about, because they need to reproduce the problem for them to be able to issue and fix. If they cannot reproduce the problem, they will never fix the problem.
Correct. So there is one question regarding the NDK,
Mhm.
that when we are and this is posted by the Nikunj Patel.
Okay.
So he wrote that when we are using the NDK at that time, we can get successful run for debug mode. But when we go to create release APK, at that time getting some build error. So is there any kind of configuration changes that Nikunj need to take care of, or it is actually a bug?
Okay, so this is not an Android Studio bug, first of all. The second thing is that this problem is coming from the build setup that they have. So when you talk about NDK and when you talk about debug mode, uh, the NDK in general, if you are trying to say there's a debug mode, you are probably specifying some configuration for it in the NDK block in your build.gradle file. Now, in that case, first you need to make sure is this exactly same as your release? If it is not, because the only difference that debug should have against release is stripping out the symbols or enabling logs. Everything else should be same. If it is not the same, then this is why you are not able to complete your build. But again, this is coming from an assumption. What would be much better is that maybe if you can share this problem with me, maybe after this uh, live stream or something, I could help you out more, because this is related to the NDK setup and configuration, and not in general to Android Studio. Like you would have the same problem if you were running the same build for NDK via terminal. So this seems like this is fixable. This is not Android Studio, and it feels more like it is something that a developer should be able to fix it. So I can help you out after this stream is finished, or we can just maybe chat about what your possible setup is, because NDK in general is pretty finicky. There's a lot of problems in the whole process. Okay, great. So I see Nikunj saying, okay, sure, he understands it, and we'll probably continue after this stream. Going back to the presentation now, let's look at the things that I was talking about. So we already went through how we can reduce the indexing. Let's also look at the part where need to come here first and do next. Yes. So one of the things that is also important is that you need to understand that if Android Studio has a lot of plugins enabled, it will make it slow. So for example, you have your Firebase plugin, you have your Google login, you have your Google Cloud plugin. None of those, if you don't use them, then they should not be enabled. And the reason I actually saw this problem and I saw the fix for it is because one of my friends pointed me to this particular Reddit thread where Jake Warden, which most people in the Android world know him, kind of suggested a certain problem for this. He talked about that the reason that the IDE is slower is because you have all these plugins. And then he talked about how you can disable most of them, and you will see a significant increase in your speed of builds. And he's not making this up. When I actually tried this, my build time was down to 6 minutes without all the extra changes. So you remember I talked about 38 minutes of build time and then down to 28. From 28 to 6 minutes, I went by just disabling the plugins. So that this one is a pretty big one. You want to disable all the plugins that you don't use, and you will see a significant increase in using Android Studio. And then this is something that is a personal choice again. If you have code inside, like you have those intentions show up, you see some sort of code suggestion that show up, those definitely require some memory usage because it is analyzing your code. It is trying to figure out what to show you next as a suggestion. So you want to disable that whole process. And to do that, the simpler solution is that you just go into the files and just switch to power save mode. And when you do that, basically all code inside and all background tasks are disabled. That just increases the way that you work with Android Studio. You are able to do a lot of different things. Obviously, you don't have code inside anymore. So it's a choice to be made by the developer. What do they prefer? In my case, I prefer productivity and speed more. So I kind of disable code inside mostly, unless I definitely need to use it. But if you don't do it, then you do need to understand that it comes with a penalty for getting those auto completion update or any changes that you do in the code and want the IDE to suggest you something. It comes with a penalty. You have to use some memory to do that. So as I said earlier, all of this thing actually is us trying to figure things out in Android Studio to do something, to do some other stuff. And I wanted to get rid of that with my initial problem. So what I kind of figured out is that if I switch to terminal, I could basically get rid of all these problems and be able to code and do a lot of things in a much faster way, in a more productive cycle for a developer. So that's why I say that when we look at all these problems, terminal comes to the rescue, and we start seeing a lot of these things that can be fixed very quickly. So let's look at that situation first. The very first thing that you need to understand is that when you are working with terminal, the one and only important thing that you need to have set up is your ADB, which is an Android debug bridge. It's basically a command line tool. It is shipped with Android SDK, so you are going to have access to it anyways. It allows to interact with all the debuggable Android devices. It's kind of a client server program. And the way you use this is that you say ADB and then you pass it a parameter, right? So let's figure out some common use cases. So a standard way of installing an APK is that you will go ahead and you will say ADB install and then give it the path of APK. If you want to uninstall something, you will say ADB uninstall and then you have to give the package name. I'll talk about automating this process. So just bear with me for the whole section that I'm talking about. These commands are the actual command that you will write, but we will figure out of writing less of this command so that we can get things done much more faster, right? So install, uninstall with a package name, and you should be able to install an application, uninstall an application. If you do wanted to copy something from the file system that is on your laptop to the Android device, you say ADB push and the path to the file and the path to the directory on the device. Simple step, simple command that you type in your terminal. If you want to get something from the system, from the Android device to the system, You basically pull by saying path to the directory on the device, file dot whatever the extension is, and then path on the system will download the file on your laptop. There are definitely other tools that you can access via ADB shell. You can kind of access Activity Manager, Emulator, Package Manager, Device Policy Manager, Logcat, and Dumpsys. And there are many more, right? But all of these actually execute through the Gradle wrapper, which we all know is basically a simple file that allows you to execute Gradle, right? And Android Studio kind of does the same thing. It goes ahead in the background, it executes this Gradle wrapper to trigger your Gradle task. So when we actually go ahead on terminal, we type Gradle Liu, assemble debug. This is a task on your project. Android Gradle plugin produces this Gradle task for you. This is exactly equivalent to you going into the Android Studio build menu and clicking make project. So basically, I can replace make project with typing Gradle Liu assemble debug. We are going to do more of this stuff actually. So the usual way for you to go ahead and inspect code is by going into Android Studio, choosing Analyze, and hitting Inspect Code. But the equivalent for the same thing on terminal is called Gradle Liu lint. Now, lint is basically a Gradle task. It allows you to like check for different things, structure inconsistencies, allows you to write more maintainable code. So you usually want to do this as a developer on your terminal too, that you don't want to skip linting your code. When you do it from terminal though, you get like a web page that looks like this. It suggests you the problems. There's a correctness, warning, and priority level of all of this thing. But when you do it with Android Studio, you see a pop-up window at the bottom of an Android Studio. This is what it replaces with. If you were to use a terminal, you see a web page that you have to work with. And then there are other tools that you can actually start using for doing a lot of things that Android Studio does. So for example, you do this code formatting, you do this code analysis of your Kotlin code. You can use detect for that. There is also KT-lint for it that will format your code, will also look for Kotlin code consistencies. And you can use all of this if you wanted to on your terminal because you're not using Android Studio. It is highly configurable. It allows you to do almost all the different kind of things you can think of. You can put it as a Gradle plugin. Also checks for complexity of your code. To execute this, the usual way you will do it on terminal is that you say it's a jar file, standard jar file. You will say java-jar detect clee.jar, and then you want to run it in the debug mode. When you do that, this is how it outputs the result in your terminal. It shows you the complexity report. It shows you the project statistics. And also would kind of, if there were any other problems, it will kind of show you that, and then you can fix that problem right away by saying detect clee.jar and -- with a fix flag for it. Same goes for KT-lint. You can also do the same thing with that. These are comparable tools to use here. There is another tool, by the way. Before we jump into that, let's understand Android Studio allows you to command click or control click onto a certain symbol and jump into the source code for that. Now, when you are on a terminal, you can't do that, right? So how would you replace that tool? You use something called Classy Shark. Now, Classy Shark is, you can see it's under Google, but it is not kind of supported by Google. If you go onto this link, you will see they say we are not 100% supported by Google, but it lives under the Google directory. What it allows you to do is it jump inside the source code of your file. This is how it looks like. This is how you will execute it first. You have to call the standard jar way. You will say java-jar, the classy shark.jar file. The result, though, is something like this. You see the source code of decompiled code, right? So it's a window that lives outside your VS Code, for example, and your terminal. And this is where you can look through the source code and figure out things that you would ideally have done inside Android Studio, because Android Studio comes with a Java bytecode decompiler. Terminal doesn't come with that, so we have to use this tool. Classy Shark also allows you to look into the section. I'll get back to Maulik's question in a minute. So Classy Shark also allows you to look at the way your classes are distributed across all the dependencies. So for here, you can see how many classes were attributed to Fabric, how many to Android, how many to support, and how many to Crashlytics in Google. So Classy Shark is basically allowing you to check your method count also. On the side, you can see it showing I have 17,252 methods in my application right now, which is good because we want to check for 65K limit. Let's go back to the question that Maulik was asking, I guess. If you have that question. Yes, here is it. So Maulik is asking, is it possible to use ADB via internet on remote devices? Okay, so as I said, ADB is a server and client-based setup. So ADB server is something that will kind of live on your laptop. So what you're talking about, that can ADB work over the internet to access your device? Yes, it can do that. You need to tell it exactly by saying which IP address it needs to take and how it will trigger that to connect to the device. So I actually personally don't use cables at all, and I use kind of a Wi-Fi connection to say 6 emulators, and I use with 3 physical devices. So I'm not with emulators. Yeah, it's direct connection, but in general, you want to do it more with the physical devices, and it will work with that. And yes, there's also an article that I wrote about it, and you can always find how to do this thing. So that's good.
So finally, we have the article for the question,
Yeah.
asked by Maulik, and
Yeah.
the same article is written by you itself. So it is already in the comment section, and just people can go and just check the article.
Yeah.
Thanks
Yeah.
for the question, Maulik.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Nishant, we have like a couple of minutes
Yeah.
as we need to end. So yeah, over to you again.
Yes. Okay. So going back to the Classy Shark. So we have AVD Manager, which allows you to work with Android virtual devices. As usual, you have it inside Android SDK. You definitely, if you wanted to work with things, you will start doing by saying AVD Manager list or AVD Manager create, and then you give it a name. If you want to delete something, you will delete by taking the name. Now, this is exactly the same as you would do it inside Android Studio. You will select AVD Manager, and then you will create, give it a name, and then delete something if you wanted. This is how you would do it on terminal. I have to write these commands and make them work. You also have screen copy, SCRCPY as we call it. This is from the people from Jenny Motion, Jenny Mobile now, and that just allows you to start projecting your screen for other people to work with. And you can also record files. So the reason I'm telling here is because through Logcat in Android Studio, you can record your screen and you can take screenshots. I don't have access to that Logcat screen, so I need to use screen copy to trigger a recording of my screen or take a screenshot of the screen. I can also show touches, exactly the same in your And the way you work with this is that standard way of saying listing all the packages that exist. Then you want to install a certain package by giving its name, or you can uninstall a package if there is none of those existing, and then you update it if you want to. Again, I'm writing all these commands to trigger that from the terminal. So because I don't have access to Android Studio while in the terminal world. There's also battery storing, which probably I would suggest that you go through it, but basically it's a Python tool and it allows you to measure your battery consumption when the device is not plugged in. Works only with API 21 and above. Looks like this. You can drill into each part of where the battery is getting consumed, and then you can obviously figure out where you need to optimize for. Yeah, more drill down information if you wanted to. You can obviously see how long the screen was on, how long was the screen off. There's a bunch of information. I would suggest that you jump into this and figure out a couple of ways of using this in your project. It's really helpful. And then at the end, I just want to mention this part for this section is that IntelliJ IDEA is a very good candidate to work with Android Studio, Android development. And you can basically ditch Android Studio and just work with IntelliJ IDEA. Although it does not have access to all these extra utilities that I talked about. You don't have access to constraint layout editor, profilers, resource manager, apply changes, any of this stuff. And for those people, those who say that they don't have a better machine on the system, you have an option of actually syncing up to a cloud provider that will allow you to sync your project directly to the cloud provider. So say, for example, you have a very high-end machine on the cloud, and then you push your code there, it will build your APK and return the APK back by using something called mainframe. So mainframe is a very good tool. I've used this in the past. There are many ways of working with this, but if you don't have a high-end machine, you can buy a high-end machine on the cloud, which is way cheaper, by the way. You pay by month, and it's probably going to cost you like $15. And then you are able to build unlimited number of time on that very quickly and just getting the APK back. So at this point, I want to show you something that I do personally, is that I am been running all these commands as full commands, but that's not how I work with it. The way I work is as I trigger aliases, and that allows me to trigger the full command as just one command. So here's an example. I say push release to device. I say ADB push the APK and then the directory path for it. For me to execute this, I just need to call push release to device. I don't have to type the whole command. So what we are going to do is that I have built all these aliases for myself, and it allows me to do certain things. So for installing a device on multiple devices, the way I do it is as I say apk install and app debug.apk, and when it goes through my alias called apk install, this apk install to 10 devices at the same time, because I'm extracting their ID from ADB devices, and then I'm going and calling install on each of these IDs. We talked about how I go through the build process. So I'm going to talk about the next step where how I do building. So I created an alias called build and install APK. So I say assemble debug, which is your build process. And then I call APK install, which we used in the earlier one. And basically the build is the project is built and the APK is installed to all devices. But I wanted to go another step, because when you hit run on Android Studio, when the app is built and installed, the app also opens up. Turns out you can't do it with my version earlier. So I use something called launch debug APK. And that basically uses the monkey tool to open the app too. So my build command actually looks something like this: build and install launch debug APK, that basically builds and installs the APK and also launches the app. So for me, the only command I need to run, which is an equivalent of run in Android Studio, is build, install, launch, debug APK. That's what I use. I don't type any extra command, and it does the work for me. There are other commands that I have built for myself. This one is called screenshots. It allows me to take a screenshot. RM app is remove the app, clear the data of the app. I can just call these small commands and it will do that work for me. I have put all these aliases that I'm talking about in a gist file. The link is here that you can use. It is something that maybe you should look into when you have time, because it's something that you will have to set up and then maybe experiment with things. And going another step on top of is that if you remember, I mentioned that Android Studio removed the ability to deploy to multiple devices at the same time. The way I build that is that I build something called ADB-E or ADB Enhanced. It's a shell script that allows me to trigger any command for multiple devices. So I just need to call ADB-E instead of ADB, and I just call everything that I call with ADB, I will call with ADB-E. So basically a shell script that runs through an if-else and also like a for loop. So it will go through all devices and it will push that to everyone there. And I think you have an option of doing this through a Gradle plugin too. This is something that I've built around. But if you want to use a plugin, you can obviously use the other plugin too. The plugin looks like this. You have install device, the variant, the install device variants run with a variant. So your call is basically, it's like a Gradle task now. And you say, Gradle, you install device debug. I am not 100% in for this plugin because it doesn't allow me to do a lot of different things. But maybe for most of the people, this would cover all the sections. So you should definitely give it a try if you're not into terminal based development. And as a bonus tip, I think this is the last one. So this is a bonus tip, as in a lot of people actually talk about that we can do incremental builds from the Android Studio. You have apply changes as a button, right? You can do the same from the terminal. Just need to say adb install and pass it a flag called fast deploy, which for me is apply changes for terminal. I don't actually use Android Studio as much, if you ask me, and so I have a replacement for everything. So apply changes was replaced by incremental install for me, and I can just do the same apply changes cycle for myself. I guess I already talked about most of them, but what I did wanted to highlight in the love experience, like my love experience with Android Studio, was that the team is actually doing a lot of things. Android Studio team is doing a lot of things. They are building a lot of things in terms of like multi-releases, and they are focused effort in making fundamental features of the IDE accessible. So Project Marvel was basically doing that. They definitely have improved a lot of things, which you should go through whenever they make a release, right? So they are doing a lot of investment, but there are still issues. The point is that you will always find some issues, although they are moving in the right directions. They kind of always build all these command line tools, is why I love the Android Studio development team. They are making sure that Android Studio exists as it is, but they are also building these command line tools that you can run through. And one of those things that maybe I can highlight once is that you have seen APK Analyzer as a GUI inside Android Studio, but it also exists as an Android as a command line tool. And the split is something like this. You basically call APK Analyzer with a certain command and flags, and it kind of does exactly same what your GUI version does. So the Android Studio team is investing heavily in building the GUI for Android Studio. That's true, yes, but they are also building command line tools. So people like me who actually don't want to use Android Studio are also covered, which is a good thing. There are many ways that you can use this. I would suggest that you actually go through this later on. But there's obviously a lot of information on APK Analyzer that you should check on developer.android.com. You have all these different things. You also, like, you can get package name by using APK Analyzer. I've used this a lot in my tools. And yeah, and then there are also other tools that they have built. They have built size analyzer. They have built, I would say, Android Studio Poet also exists that helps you benchmark Android Studio projects, wherein you provide a config and you can generate hundreds of the projects with the same functionality in that. And you have simple perfs, which is basically equivalent to CPU profiling inside Android Studio. It is a command line tool, so you can use it on Mac, Linux, Windows, whatever you want, and it will work for you. There are many ways to execute this, but again, this is a technical detail, so I'm not going to cover this through. I believe you should go on and read the documentation for this. You have NDK stack. For someone who was talking about NDK stuff, you can definitely look through the obfuscated native code and convert into a standard stack trace by using NDK stack command line tool. A lot of people actually use that. And this is how you call it. You say adb logcat, and then you pass the NDK stack with the sim value, as in your symbols that you generated for your native library. You have NDK JDB. You have ASAN address sanitizers. I've worked with address sanitizers in the past. If you do have questions on that, I can actually help you out with that. But it is something that allows you to do detect errors in memory for C++ code. It's a very important tool, and it's very strong, I would say, when you want to detect some memory related stuff. You have systrace, you have dumpsys. All of these are command line tools. I'm just mentioning them here, so you have an idea that, okay, these exist. You have bundle tool, basically work with your APK bundles, and Perfecto, which allows you to get performance information from your Android devices. And there's a bunch of these tools. So basically, you can get all these tools at terminal and you can use them. And that's a good thing, because yeah, it's an open space, and we should all be able to use our tools for our development as and how we like it, and be more productive with this thing. I don't know what this is. Oh, I think this is quite recently. I think you have seen this in the past, but basically now Android Studio allows you to add dependencies uh, from within code. So if you type work manager, it will allow you to add a dependency as in code completion, which is good. So we're all happy with this. A lot of cool things from Android Studio tools team. And I think this ends my talk mostly. This is my life. People telling me to use Android Studio versus me using VS Code plus Terminal because that works out for me all the time. Um, and I'm always in this state because I don't understand people using Android Studio. You have links and references. Great. If you have questions, if not, this is it.
So before we take any questions, so we have Paresh Mani here who want to ask some questions to you. So
Yes.
over to you, Paresh bhai.
Hey Nishant,
Hello.
like we are meeting after been a long time, I would say.
Yeah.
We couldn't meet somewhere during any events, like since quite a long time. But
Yeah.
yes, we are happen to meet over internet thanks to Corona, by the way. So I wanted to I'm very well aware about like what all experience and applications you have developed and all open source libraries that you have developed. So I just wanted to I just wanted you to share about your experience. I will go through one by one questions. So is like we have been friends since quite a long time, and I know you have started your career as a graphic designer
Yes.
while being intern. But
Yes.
then, so question is like, how's your journey from being a graphic designer to Android developer? So, like, from what all sources you go to learn, and how are you finding having hands-on over graphics as well as Android libraries? And of course, I know you have explored and you used to play with web technologies like JS as well.
Yeah.
So if you can brief about that, then that would be helpful to
Yeah.
Ahmedabad community.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so as Paresh already mentioned, so I started as a graphic designer as an intern. Yes, that's because I actually like I still have that passion and also like interest in graphic designing, and then it somehow turned out that if I started doing graphic designing while being in university and being an intern, it would kind of just help me get more exposed to the world, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I started doing that. But I would say as I started doing that, I got in touch with a lot of different teams and people, and then also started getting into GDG during this time. So this was during my university time. I started getting into GDG, and I think I started talking to more people in the GDG community, and that just broadens your experience, your vision, and because I was doing this and I was talking to so many people, I happened to come across Android at that time, and I saw there was so much like things happening in the Android world. So I did my final year project for Android, and that basically sparked my love for Android, and I started doing Android more onwards from there onwards. And I did graphic designing, I would say, for 1.5 years, even after my graduation. But Android was something that I was doing on my own for my for myself, or also for open source work. At this time itself is when I started talking to more GDG members. Now that I was out of university, and I think we were at some summit where I met Parisa and other people. Obviously, is when we actually met in person. Although I've been following Parisa for some time on Stack Overflow and everything for Android, considering the time, the 2013, 2014, yes. So Paisar was basically the only person I knew for Android at that time, right? So that's why I'm mentioning that's how it sparked everything. And then we met in person, and that kind of started everything towards in the right direction. My company that I joined at that time hired me as interaction designer, but after the summit, I actually went ahead and I talked to them and I said, I want to do more Android now. I have a feeling I can do better in that state. So my company agreed. They obviously gave me a chance to work in Android field, and I went ahead and did things for them. That's when I started building Android libraries and stuff, because they wanted me to build an Android library for them. And also
Okay.
during this, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so that so you brought very interesting point in this discussion, like about Android libraries. So also, like that was actually my second question, that you have built so many libraries and that you have open source over GitHub. So those community members who are watching this video, I would suggest you guys to take a look at github.com/Nisrulz, his Twitter handle, wherein you would find a lot of libraries. So Nishan, can you share about library building experience? Library or SDK, both are the same thing. So
Yeah.
if you can brief, like how do you get ideas? Basically, how do you write, and what all steps, best practices, and things. I know you have already you are having one complete session on that, uh, uh, like two, 3 sessions, basically part of this complete series, I would say.
Yes.
So if you can just brief about like library building experience, then that would be really informative things for the community.
Yeah, yeah. So where do I start? Okay, the general idea is that I don't build libraries to publish it to GitHub or something. That's not something that's my driving force. What is my driving force is that if I see a problem and I have to do it many times, I kind of abstract it out as a library for myself. It's not published yet. And when I see that I'm using the library now more often, I think, is this the problem that only I am facing or more people are facing? So the usual way that I try to figure that out is I actually ask a few people in my team, the one that I'm working with, and I ask them, do you think that this is a common problem for you? And if they say yes, then this library actually gets published out in GitHub or for other people to use. Um, the process of building kind of is something that involves a lot of nuances. As Paisa already said, I have a series for this. There is a document, also like a blog post on Medium, which I already quoted. But anyways, you can find that there, which walks through what are the things that you should do to be able to write the Android library or any library in general. It is using at common concepts. And then obviously there are other talks that I've given, which were an addition on top of this blog post. And if you want to search for it, it is called Things I Wish I Knew When I Started Building Android
Yes.
SDK/libraries. So there are volume 2 version is what is outside in public. There will be a volume 3 soon. That's I can tell you, because things have changed over a period of time, and it's been many years. Like last year, I was giving volume 2, and this year it will be volume 3. But mostly the general idea is that first figure out, is this reusable, and that should be your driving force. That you fix it for yourself. If it works for you, then publish it to the world, and then it will actually be successful because you already took care of making it good for yourself. If it works for you, then it will work for other people. But if you just made a library and push it out, that doesn't work because you did not solve a problem. Unless a problem is being solved in a common manner, it should not be a library. That's the general.
Also you should be discussing out your problems and discussion while building libraries. So you
Yes.
would be able to get more contribution, and you would be able to get more thoughts and feedbacks, like how you can take it forward from there.
Yes.
So I mean,
Asking questions is
keep on
best.
adding more versions. I mean, maintaining libraries, not just building.
Yeah. Having as many people give you feedback, the more people you can get feedback from, the better, because they will point out things that you have not even thought about. So that is the important part: having feedback and building on top of it, making it much better with period of time.
Okay. That was like good enough, and not much info, but yes, like helpful info, I would say, because you have already taken volume 1 and volume 2, like things I wish I knew while building Android libraries. So yes. But definitely, we would love to have you again for sharing your experience and knowledge on building libraries, because you have had experience like I mean, you have built a lot of things over GitHub.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to come back and maybe share more information on that. Something new that I've probably not shared up till now would also be nice. Because I feel like there are many people like me. When I was in India, I started building these in India. And I feel like most of these people, those who are now, that those who are young people, they see the problem in very different ways, right? So they have more opportunity to build something in this direction, and obviously this is also good for their career too, right? This shows up in their career, in their um, resume, as we call it, because
Yes.
their work is something that other people also start using. So building a library is actually something that's useful for you in your career. And I use this heavily. As I started building libraries, more people were using it. They had the same problem, and they saw my library as a solution. This just
Mhm.
gives me leverage when I go for an interview. They see that and they see, oh, so many other people use it. So it's something that I've used in my career. So mostly other people can also do the same.
Cool. So thank you so much, Nishan. So here, we are highlighting some of the feedback from the community people.
Mhm.
Okay. So yeah. So here, Deep is saying that thanks Nishan for this session. I will surely give this VS Code plus terminal configuration a try.
Yes, that would be nice. Give it a try. Yes, tell me if something is not working for you, and maybe I can help you out.
Uh, Kishan Singh writing that he's awesome. I mean, he's mentioning you. Yeah, of course, he is awesome.
Thank you for saying that.
So Khushbu Thakur wrote that helpful session. Thanks to GDG Ahmedabad and Nishan for arranging this session. Thank you, Khushbu, for joining.
Thank you.
The last
Okay, so
comment.
Kishan Singh also wrote that I must love blog is run the app from the terminal.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going quickly through all the feedback.
Thank you, Manthan. Thank you, Maulik.
So he writes that thanks Nishan. It made me realize that I can have social distancing with Android Studio.
Yes.
That is
and
most
that
funniest comment as of now.
and that's where we are currently helping all of us, not just you, but all of us, for maintaining social distancing, at the same time utilizing this boring time for learning and learning lot of things over online. So
Yep.
please feel free to share feedback, comments, reach out to us if you want to be a speaker. Even 15 or 30-minute session would work.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikunj. Thank you, Harsh. Thank you, Swapnil.
Okay, before we wrap this up, I just want to update you that we have the viewers from the Canada, from the Pune, from the Rajkot. So yeah,
Nice.
we are are able to reach out to the other people who are actually looking for such kind of content. So thank you so much everyone for joining this
Yeah.
live session, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you do not miss the upcoming live session and webinar. And feel free to share your feedback and experience in the comment section so that we can also improve. If you have any kind of feedbacks, just feel free to share it. So next time if anything is went wrong, we can look up to it and work on that to improve this. So thank you so much everyone for joining, and special thanks for Nishant to you and joining with the different time zone and taking some time and sharing your knowledge. So before we end, we just want to see your cool camera, like graphics, if you can
I will
just show.
I will have to see if I can trigger it from here. Let's see if it works. So, okay, yeah, I can try it. Yes. So let's try this, and I will have to change my feed, I think. I hope it works. There it is.
Cool.
Yes, it
Okay.
did.
Okay,
Yes.
so anyone want to just to know how he did, just feel free to follow him on Instagram or Twitter, or maybe wherever he is available on a GitHub and Stack Overflow somewhere.
Yes.
So yeah,
He
thank
is
you so much,
Nisrulz
Nishan.
everywhere. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
All
Okay.
right.
So happy weekend. Enjoy your Sunday. Be safe. Stay at home.
And yes,
Okay.
we are already having 2 sessions in pipeline, our pipeline. Definitely, we would be hosting it very soon. Most probably in a in by next weekend, most probably. But we may host it even before that.
Oh,
Okay.
nice.
So we have so we had today one visitor from Alphabet team from Google headquarters. Hey
Nice.
Akash, thank you so much for joining, and feel free to share your feedback.
Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah. Bye everyone.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Bye bye. Thanks, Nishant, for